As I sit here, recounting the events of that fateful night, I can still feel the chill running down my spine. It's been weeks since it happened, but the memory remains etched in my mind like a scar that refuses to fade. It was just another typical evening at home, or so I thought. My parents had just left for the weekend, leaving me alone in the house. They trusted me enough to handle a couple of nights by myself, and honestly, I loved being home alone. That is, until something happened. It started innocently enough. I was lounging on the couch, mindlessly scrolling through my phone, when I noticed a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. At first, I dismissed it as a trick of the light or perhaps my own tired imagination playing tricks on me. But then it happened again, and this time I couldn't ignore it. I glanced around the dimly lit living room, searching for any sign of what could have caused the movement. Everything seemed normal, yet I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. I tried to brush it off, chalking it up to my overactive imagination, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. As the night wore on, the feeling of being watched intensified, creeping into every corner of the house. I tried to distract myself, turning up the volume on the TV and immersing myself in mindless entertainment, but it was no use. The sense of being watched hung over me like a dark cloud, refusing to dissipate. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard something. A soft, barely audible whisper echoing through the empty house. My blood ran cold as the words registered in my mind. Alone. You're alone. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to locate the source of the voice. But there was nothing. Just the eerie silence of the night pressing in on me from all sides. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination running wild, but deep down, I knew better. Terrified, I made my way through the house, checking every room and corner in a desperate attempt to find the source of the whisper. But each time, I came up empty-handed. As the hours dragged on, I felt like a prisoner in my own home, trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the windows sent me spiraling further into paranoia. I was convinced that something was lurking in the darkness, something evil and intent on doing me harm. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I saw it. A shadowy figure lurking in the corner of the room, its form twisted and distorted like something out of a fever dream. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to escape the nightmare unfolding before me, but fear rooted me to the spot, rendering me powerless to move. But then, as quickly as it had appeared, the figure vanished, leaving me alone in the suffocating darkness once more. I stumbled backwards, my heart pounding in my chest as I struggled to make sense of what I had just seen. Was it real? Or just another trick of my panicked mind? I didn't stick around to find out. I grabbed my phone and bolted out of the house, not stopping until I was far, far away. I never used to believe in the kind of horror stories you see in movies. You know, the ones where the protagonist is always running for their life from some unseen terror. I always thought those were just for entertainment, nothing more. But one night changed everything for me. It was a night like any other. I had just finished dinner and settled in to watch some TV before bed. My roommate was out of town for the weekend, leaving me alone in our small apartment. As I sat on the couch, mindlessly flipping through channels, I heard a faint sound coming from outside. At first, I brushed it off as just the wind, or maybe some neighborhood kids playing around. But then it continued, growing louder as time passed. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer and closer to the front door. My heart started to race as I realized I was alone. I tiptoed over to the window and peeked through the blinds, trying to see who it was without being seen myself. But the darkness outside made it impossible to make out any figures. I reached for my phone, fingers trembling as I dialed 911. But before I could even hit the call button, I heard a loud bang from the front door. My breath caught in my throat as I watched the doorknob jiggle violently, followed by the sound of someone trying to force their way inside. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped, with nowhere to hide. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the banging stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, so thick you could almost feel it pressing in on you. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of movement outside, but there was nothing. Minutes passed like hours as I waited, too terrified to move. Finally, after a while, I mustered up the courage to inch closer to the door, my heart pounding in my chest with every step. I hesitated for a moment before reaching out and cautiously turning the doorknob. To my relief, the door was still locked, and there was no sign of anyone outside. I let out a shaky breath, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. But just as I was about to retreat back into the safety of my apartment, I noticed something strange. There, lying on the welcome mat, was a single red rose. I picked it up cautiously, turning it in my hands, trying to make sense of it. Without thinking, I dropped it in a hurry and stumbled back into my apartment, slamming the door shut behind me. I spent the rest of the night huddled in my room, too afraid to sleep or even move. Every creak of the floorboards sent me into a state of panic, convinced that whoever had tried to break in was still out there, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It wasn't until the first light of dawn filtered through the window that I dared to venture out of my room. I checked every lock and window, making sure they were secure before finally allowing myself to breathe a sigh of relief. But as I opened my front door, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. And as I glanced down at my welcome mat, now empty except for a few petals, I knew that whatever had happened last night was far from over. I remember it vividly, the feeling of unease creeping up my spine as I stood in the dimly lit hallway of my house. It was late, well past midnight, and the only sound that echoed through the empty rooms was the soft hum of the air conditioning. My parents were out of town for the weekend, leaving me alone in the house for the first time in years. At first, I relished the idea of having the place to myself. But now, as I stood there in the silence, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone after all. I made my way cautiously down the hall, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet with each step. Every shadow seemed to dance and twist in the darkness, playing tricks on my tired mind. I tried to brush off the feeling of dread that washed over me, chalking it up to the overactive imagination of a person who had spent too much time watching horror movies. As I reached the end of the hallway, I paused, my hand hovering over the doorknob to my bedroom. The room beyond was shrouded in darkness, the only light coming from the faint glow of the street lamp outside my window. I hesitated for a moment, debating whether to retreat back to the living room or to brave the unknown darkness. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room felt colder than the rest of the house. I flicked on the light switch, illuminating the room in a soft yellow glow. But even in the light, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I quickly busied myself with getting ready for bed, hoping that the mundane task would distract me from my growing sense of unease. But as I slipped beneath the covers and closed my eyes, the feeling only intensified. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside sent my heart racing in my chest. I tried to convince myself that I was being paranoid, that there was nothing to be afraid of. But then, I heard something disturbing. A soft tapping sound coming from the far corner of my room. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I strained to listen. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, as if whatever was making the sound was trying to get my attention. Panic surged through me, and I jumped out of bed, fumbling for the light switch. But before I could reach it, something grabbed hold of my ankle, dragging me back towards the darkness. I screamed, thrashing and kicking with all my might, but the grip only tightened, pulling me further into the shadows. With one final burst of strength, I kicked myself free and ran towards the door, throwing it open and sprinting down the hallway. I didn't stop until I was outside the neighbor's house, kicking and screaming at their door to let me in. At last, they let me in and called the police for me. They let me wait there until the police arrived. They came and searched my house but found no one inside. But to my horror, they found that the basement window had been pried open.